but Southside was always considered the other side of Richmond, maybe not even a part of the city of Richmond itself. And so that community had been abandoned for so long that the whole entire community had this spirit of hopelessness. It had the highest rates of disenfranchised individuals. It has the highest poverty levels, the highest incidences of substandard housing. Literally, when you walked out onto Porter Street, I remember in the evenings, you would literally see the homeless individuals and the winos, for lack of a better word, with the trash cans on fire, warming their hands. And there was this one rose, if you will, or one flower that was a bright spot in the community. And it was an older gentleman named Mr. Walker. We would go talk to Mr. Walker because he was the only homeowner who was left on that street. And Mr. Walker, he talked about white picket fences. He talked about leaving your front and back doors open. But he was disheartened at the idea that over time, his community had become abandoned.
Redlining was a federal housing policy started in the 1930s with the Federal Homeowners Loan Corporation. And what happened in communities around the country, including Richmond, was that analysts came into communities and determined which neighborhoods would be quote unquote safe neighborhoods or profitable neighborhoods for banks and insurance companies to either make loans or write policies in. These were neighborhoods that were primarily occupied by African Americans, where restrictions were put in place that made it very difficult for families living in those communities to get home loans, to get insurance, to have economic opportunity, to get better housing. Those impacts of redlining, it can still be seen in our city and in cities all over the country because those impacts were long-term and pervasive. So it's within those neighborhoods, those redline neighborhoods, that you still see a lot of poor housing quality, poor housing conditions, poor infrastructure. And it's really only in the last few years that we've begun to focus on correcting that.
I didn't come from generational wealth. So I didn't have the mega down payment in today's market in order to buy a home. My only big issue was my student loan debt. But if I wouldn't have been able to have been afforded my college education, I wouldn't become the person that I am today. So it's one of those things where good enough to get an education, good enough to have a business in the city and be a public servant, but not good enough to live within a city. Something was wrong with that, and I'm glad Southside Community was there to help me with this. Through their free courses, their free online workshops, and of course, before pre-COVID, the one-on-one face-to-face sessions. But then through COVID, they continued the support with the virtual sessions. I was able to then find a lender, get pre-qualified for a loan, be pre-qualified in eligibility for down payment assistance programs, and be eligible now to own my very first home.
When I came here, I started working in workforce development. At that point, I identified there was a huge need to serving Latinos. It is a population underserved, and they see us as a point of that where they can get that information from. They trust Southside Community Development and Housing Corporation because we speak the language. We believe that when somebody comes to our center, it's because they're looking for something. We will provide some type of resources. Can be employment, can be financial education, can be digital, can be either information about housing or helping out with the rent relief program.
Southside has given hope to a lot of residents that thought that it was impossible for them to become first-time home buyers. They have expanded to different territories, not only just single-family housing, but also multi-family housing.
When we first started 16 years ago, I went to Southside Community and had a conversation with Mr. Jim Chambers and Diana. And a few weeks later, our first opportunity was a $7,500 contract doing tuck pointing on a duplex in Blackwell. And 16 years later, we're building multifamily affordable developments together. We are just a part of the overall big picture, but between Canterbury and Southside, we've identified certain parcels and we have created strategic partnerships and relationships to continue growing our portfolio and developing affordable housing properties together.
They've touched so many neighborhoods that you would think would never be as beautiful as they are now, simply because they had a vision and they wanted to see these neighborhoods bloom and flourish and provide stable housing for residents that would otherwise think they couldn't afford it. Southside is one of the last minority-led housing organizations across the state. Southside, with a small staff, does big things.
Southside Community Development is changing lives for families, for children, through the quality projects that they build, they develop, through the services that they provide, first-time homebuyer ownership. The knowledge of Diana and her team is priceless.
Southside really stands out as an organization that has had great success in creating homeownership opportunities for Black families at a much higher level than other organizations that are sometimes operating in the same communities. If we can scale up that activity, we can be talking about thousands of households over the next decades.
I'm 43 years old. So for me, being able to retire in a city that I love, Southside, in the community that I love and I also serve, it will mean everything to me, so that I can still also now be able to create generational wealth for anyone that's after me in my family and be able to pass on something and have a legacy. So it would mean everything to be able to work and live in a city that I love.